For the moment of silence, if we could keep Carl Meyer. He was the Pine Brook custodian who recently passed away. Mrs. Gina Lapani, the mother of Tony Lapani, our director of Phys Ed, Health and Athletics. And to retired principal from Greece Olympia, Chris Sloan, her brother Stephen passed away. So if you keep the Meyer, Lapani, and Sloan families in your thoughts and prayers, that would be much appreciated. And I'm going to take a minute of personal privilege here to read. We had Odyssey social studies teacher, Mr. Eric Ekstrom, who was seriously injured. And I'm going to read what occurred. On July 13th, the unimaginable happened to our family when my brother-in-law, Eric, suffered a catastrophic accident while on a trip to Ocean City, Maryland. Eric was getting out of the water when he was struck by a wave in such a way that caused him to lose consciousness. He was airlifted to shock trauma at the University of Maryland, where our worst fears were confirmed. Eric suffered a neck and spine injury, which has rendered him unable to move anything from his neck down. My sister Audrey is 7 months into a high-risk pregnancy. With the support and guidance of her OB, she flew to Maryland on the next available plane. She has not left his side since that time. Eric is a beloved history teacher who sparks his student interest with fun-loving charisma and wit. To know Eric is to insanely feel at home in his presence. We're going to put the GoFundMe up on the boards, so if everybody could keep the Ekstrom family in your thoughts and prayers, and if you could make a donation or find it in your heart to help that family, it would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Can I have somebody move the agenda, please? Moved by Ms. Farrar, second by Ms. Farmer. Any comments, questions, additions, or deletions to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of the agenda? That passes 7-0. Moving on to staffing, can I have somebody move the staffing to the table, please? Moved by Mr. Maloney, seconded by Ms. Flores. Any comments, questions, concerns on staffing? Seeing none, all those in favor? That passes 7-0. Moving on, 2.02, tenure. Can I have somebody move the tenure to the table? Oh, I'm sorry. You got to give me a heads up, Gina. Sometimes I don't remember.
All right, good evening.
Assistant Superintendent Larson, go ahead.
Thank you. I have the pleasure to welcome Mark Fleming, our Director of School Improvement, this evening. Mark, if you'd like to come up front and center.
Oh, yeah, you got to stand in front of Gina. Give the whole salute. And
You don't have to stand in front of me, you can stand in front of the board.
no, we prefer when you stand in front of
audience.
Gina. It gives us more ammunition.
Mark began his career with Greece Central as a student teacher at Apollo Middle School in February of 2000, quickly becoming a substitute teacher and advancing over the years to a social studies teacher, mentor, TOSA, assistant principal, secondary principal at Olympia, and most recently as the principal on special assignment. Mark's favorite part of the job is collaborating with students, parents, staff, and community members in order to build upon the proud legacy of the Greece Central School District. Mark enjoys keeping up with his daughters and their many adventures. He also enjoys movies, live music, snowshoeing, and hiking, and hopes to one day conquer all 46 Adirondack high peaks. Mark is exceedingly grateful for the support from his entire family, including his parents, aunt and uncle, and in-laws, and especially his wife Lisa and daughters Josie and Julia, without whom he would not be able to have the privilege of serving Greece Central. Mark is looking forward to his new position with new challenges and new ways to impact students and staff and continuing his career with Greece. Congratulations.
Picture, oh, you can't say it. You got to do picture time. Jeremy and Kathy. It's his first official picture, too.
And I do have one other person who unfortunately is not able to be with us tonight, but I did want to read through his bio. We have approved Dan Keelan as the new elementary principal at Holmes Road. Dan spent the first part of his career at Wayne Central School District, working as an elementary teacher for 14 years, and gained administrative experience working as the dean of students for 3 years. Most recently, Dan joined the Greece Central School District as an assistant principal. He split time between English Village and Lakeshore for 2 years, and has spent the last 2 years at Craig Hill. He thoroughly enjoyed working with all assistant principals in Greece as he led the elementary assistant principals for the last year. Outside of work, Dan enjoys coaching baseball and volunteering. He is very active through athletics: basketball, softball and baseball, golf, bowling, tennis, and volleyball. Dan also loves the outdoors, including fishing and spending time with friends and family. Dan, with his wife Rachel, have twin 17-year-old sons, Jacob and Lucas. They also have a dog named AJ. They're very active with their sons' sporting events and tournaments that take them to different states throughout the summer. Dan is looking forward to becoming an active member of the Holmes Road community, working with staff and families to support students and building relationships with students to help them increase their achievement in the classroom and achieve their goals. We're very happy to have Dan join the principal team at Greece, and we know he will make a great addition to the Holmes Road community. Congratulations.
Moving on to tenure, can I have someone move the tenure to the table, please? Moved by Ms. Flores, second by Vice President Mallour. Any comments, questions, or concerns on tenure? Seeing none, all those in favor? That passes 7-0. Is there anybody here in the audience that received tenure this evening? Congratulations. And you don't have to feel obligated to stay for the meeting if you don't want to. If you want, I'd love to have you, but. There you go. Well, thank you. 2.03, the Gus Memorandum of Agreement. Can I have somebody move that to the table, please? Moved by Ms. Farmer, seconded by Mrs. Flores. Any comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing none, all is in favor. That passes 7-0. Moving on to 2.04, guest summary sheet. Can I have somebody move that to the table, please? Moved by Ms. Farmer, second by Ms. Flores. Comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing none, all is in favor. That passes 7-0. Moving on to Gusto MOA Building Subs. Can I have somebody move that to the table, please? Moved by Mr. Malloy, second by Ms. Farmer. Comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing that all is in favor. That passes 7-0. And 2.06, Gusto MOA 2324 rates. Can I have somebody move that to the table, please? Moved by Mr. Maloney, second by Ms. Flores. Comments, questions, concerns? Seeing that all is in favor. That passes 7-0. Moving on to item 4.01, Code of Conduct presentation. Superintendent Groutman.
Yes, I'd like to invite Dr. Zaffitz and Dr. Baker to come on up. As many of you know, we have a Code of Conduct Committee that is represented many stakeholders from across our district. It's a fairly large committee that meets throughout the year and comes forward with recommendations every year for us to consider for the following year. So they're going to share with us some of the work and also what that has led to in terms of some recommendations for the coming year. So thanks for being here.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm actually just going to turn it right over to Dr. Baker, who does the lion's share of the work with the Code of Conduct and an excellent job facilitating our 4 all-day sessions and the business portion of the meeting. So,
all right. Good evening, everybody. So as Kathy shared, we have a Code of Conduct review process, and the purpose of the document is to share as a general guide for expectations for behavior for really all stakeholders within the school setting and sets norms for school expectations and behavior. The process we go through for development of the Code of Conduct involves 4 times a year we get together with multiple stakeholders to review elements of the Code of Conduct. This year we had a different full day process where we had our GTA unit member rep from each of the 18 buildings and the principal from each of the 18 buildings come together to unpack what existed already in the Code of Conduct to better understand what some of the existing structures were. It had been a while since we've done something like that other than just a basic overview at the start of the year. So we really wanted to understand some of the breakdown that came from understanding what was already in the document. That was part of what came out of the previous year's action step was how do we just make sure that people already know what exists in this document before we go and make any more changes. So our committee, then we had a business portion of the meeting that met after that 8 to 2 o'clock structure. And that met for about an hour after that implementation meeting. And that included Board of Ed members, district and building administrators, members of GTA staff, including mental health staff and teachers, Steve Chatterton, myself, and then we also had students and parents as part of the committee. So the changes that we're going over tonight are recommendations from this committee of multiple stakeholders. So just overall, one of the main goals of what we did as a committee was, again, to take what the implementation committee was finding throughout their process and actually trying to make it aligned throughout the document so that was a little bit clearer throughout. So some of the ways that we did that alignment was just sort of taking a broad look. So previous years, we've had just the dress code might have been looked at, or other elements of just a confined section. This was a more broad approach across the board, where we were looking at changes to make sure we were consistent throughout. So one example of that is we defined what some of the definitions were, such as MTSS. That really means multi-tiered systems of support through our response to intervention process. And so there were some definitions like that that we added throughout. And we helped to connect different behavior levels to make sure that we were clear on what they meant. So I'll give some specific examples about some of these as I go through the presentation. One thing that came out of the committee was an existing section on restorative practices. And so we added on page 17 a visual to help make it more clear to multiple stakeholders that restorative practices is actually a way that we can help increase accountability. And so the committee had recommended adding in a visual to help supplement the other existing information that was already in the code of conduct. We also helped to define what the different behavior levels were in the code of conduct. So in the appendix, you see a visual that looks something like this with defiance, for example, and how the green signifies a level 1. We talked a lot in an implementation committee around what does that mean? What does a minor mean versus a major? And so minor really means that it's the expectation that it's being managed within the classroom. It's lower level behaviors that could be readdressed or redirected pretty easily. And that when those become more persistent, and we defined persistent, I'll share that later on, that those become majors. Some offenses are a little bit more significant and they start already at a yellow or a red, which is a level 2 or 3A or 3B. And so we were really purposeful in trying to make clear what the differences were between each of these levels. So level 1, one of the changes that we made is that when there is a violation to the code of conduct at a level 1, that again is a classroom managed behavior, that we want our teachers to be reaching out and letting parents know through some two-way communication. So whether that's an email, if that's a preferred communication method, or whether it's a phone call home, that was missing in the document, and so we added that intentionally to it. We reorganized the behavior interventions and supports so that the level 1s all appeared grouped together. That was some feedback that we had just to make that for readability purposes. We added links with supports for ideas for interventions within the intervention sections for level 1 of classroom managed behaviors and how teachers could have resources to click on and actually get ideas of how to manage behavior within the classroom. And we defined persistent as something that continues for weeks despite interventions. And so that was the definition the committee had agreed upon after hearing feedback from the implementation committee and the business portion. For levels 2 to 3, we added in language to say that all of the behaviors or supports are inclusive within that. So for example, if we're saying that a level 2 behavior includes something that's persistent at the level 1. So going back to the defiance example, if there's persistent level 1 defiance, then all of the interventions that were done at level 1 carry over to level 2. So you're doing that and maybe adding on some additional supports and services. It's not one or the other necessarily. So we weren't repeating. There was some redundancy throughout the document. So we clarified some of that. We removed some outdated or uncommon practices for interventions. So for an example of that is a change in school was listed as an intervention when a behavior was repeated. So it's pretty atypical that that would happen. So we removed some of those examples within the document itself. Some of our definitions were pretty limiting. After we had gotten some updated SSEC from the state ed, we have to report to them. It used to be called VADER. We have to report on specific offenses. The state changed their definitions a couple of years back, but when we put those definitions in the back of our code of conduct, it was actually pretty limiting. It included things that might have been breaking penal law that wouldn't necessarily mean that it wasn't a violation to our code of conduct. So we reverted back to the original definitions and then put an appendix in so that people knew what we were reporting to state ed versus what we actually could take action on within our own code of conduct. And then we have gone through a pretty significant change with Infinite Campus, and we are able to submit online referrals now within the online system. And so that information actually our old code of conduct had two different data entry systems. Swiss was one of them and Infinite Campus was the other. And the systems didn't talk to each other. And so we were double entering into two different places. So that is no longer a problem with our new online referral system. Everything goes into Infinite Campus. The two systems talk to each other. And so we were able to remove some of the language that's no longer required for Swiss in the document. The Students with Disabilities section was updated after being reviewed by our legal team, just with some updates with new, I guess, state ed terminology that hadn't been looked at in a while. And so we just made sure it was compliant with state ed regulations in that section. And so there were some pretty, significant changes in terms of making sure that that was updated. On page 40, there was some language within the visitor section being more explicit around making an appointment, that we can't just have visitors or parents come at any point, that we do need to make an appointment just so that we're not impacting the instructional school day. And so those same changes were also put into the abridged code of conduct, and that was reorganized for readability, and we simplified some language. So that was a big chunk of our business code of conduct meetings where we were actually trying to, especially with parents and students, understand what doesn't make sense to you when you're looking at this, what do you really want to know, and how can we make this clearer? So that's the revised abridged code of conduct that you all saw in your packets. Previously on page 38, when it talks about searches, parents were not, it was never specified on when we would notify parents on a search. So we added in language that they do not need to be notified before a search is conducted, but will be contacted afterwards and informed of the outcome. And that was an attempt to be more explicit about what was actually happening within the schools that wasn't mentioned at all previously. Some other changes that we made throughout the document were on page 30, skateboards were said that they weren't allowed in school. That was an outdated practice. They have been allowed, and so we removed that language because they're similar to bikes in the sense that they just have to be put in the appropriate location. In page 48, for the definition of plagiarism, we included electronic apps as part of that. And then on page 46, we changed some language so it was more clear that it was a short-term, instead of short-term suspension, it's a short-term out-of-school suspension. Same with long-term, a long-term out-of-school suspension, just to clarify, versus in school. So our next steps is that the abridged code of conduct will be sent home to families in the welcome back packet. We will have a common presentation to explain the code of conduct and the input of the online referrals with school staff. There will also be principal presentations to each student in grades 6 through 12 for some consistent messaging on the expectations. Elementary schools also do this. It's just not necessarily the same presentation for all of them. We will make sure that we're looking at different interventions and making sure that staff understand the various tools that are embedded in this document now and still have some professional learning around classroom management strategies and professional learning around that. And then we're also looking at our restorative practices and our peer accountability council that we're expanding from Arcadia to Olympia through the Center for Youth Partnership, and making sure that we're tracking recidivism and reentry processes from suspensions back into school, and that we're taking a look at those practices to be more consistent district-wide. So that's all I have for you all. Are there questions about any of those changes?
Questions? Ms. Ferrer?
So I'll tread lightly. I know we spent a lot of time on this last year. How do you think it went last year with the code of conduct? Give us your synopsis on how it went with all of this. What do you feel?
I mean, can you be more specific? Is there, I mean, you were part of the committee. Is there things that you were feeling that you want to share?
Well, I mean, yes. 54 pages, there's a lot on that. And the code of conduct isn't just, I know it's a guide, but it's also a big part of our being in the school. So, yes, there were, I hate to say it, bring it up, but there were a lot of violations of the code of conduct. And I just want to make sure that when we're going into the next year, that we're actually going to take this more seriously. I know that we spent a lot of time, and I appreciate it. There was a lot of people in that meeting. There was a lot of good conversations that were happening. I know that there was a little subcommittee like that you mentioned that wasn't privy to us as board members and the parents and the students. But I'll give you, for instance, we added last year the face masks with hoods. Are we going to be doing a better job at the adherence to the code of conduct, I guess would be my first question. I would love to say that we were going to do that, but I didn't see a lot of that last year visually, and there was a lot of feedback regarding that. So I would definitely like to see more. We also printed violations of the code of conduct, which is a huge disappointment. And in an oversight being here, if we're printing violations of the code of conduct, it takes a while for that to happen. If we're going back and we're teaching the practices to our administration and then to our teachers, I have to comment on if somebody's taking pictures of clear violations and then we're publishing it, and it's going into a weekly publication that board members are privy to, that's not acceptable for this. And I know that this is a guide, but we need to be doing better. And I'm hoping that when we approve this next month, that we're taking more and we're going to be doing a more accountability with this. So how do you think things went as an overall experience with the code of conduct?
So I think what I'm hearing you say is that you still have concerns around implementation of the code of conduct, which was the purpose of the implementation committee, is how do we make implementation clearer so that what's written in here is actually being followed through. So as far as the process of a committee, looking at the language that's in here and how to make that clearer so it can be implemented is the scope of what our committee does. And then we take that and communicate that out to various stakeholders within the buildings, and they carry that out. So it sounds like what you're wondering about is the carryover of that. And so that's part of the hope that with the implementation team that buildings and stakeholders from those buildings better understand what's in here so that is implemented a little bit more consistently throughout the district.
Yes, I would definitely appreciate seeing more of that. So thank you, absolutely.
I want to make one point to that also. I think the design of the committee this year was very intentional to ensure and to make sure that that happened. So never have we had a rep from every building be part of that. So on the front end of it, to that point, that was the whole intention, was to include more people to make sure that there was clear understanding so that implementation could be cleaner, right?
Yep.
Ms. Farmer?
So are you saying, Christine, that each school will determine how they roll this out to their, kids, staff, everybody? And I'm wondering if there's.
Ms. Farmer?
Oh,
Can you
sorry.
speak into your microphone?
Yes.
Thank you.
Because she's right there,
I know.
So I'm wondering if, and maybe I'm going into the weeds a little bit too much in terms of making suggestions, but I'm wondering if kids will also be involved, if they will be part of the presentations, if they will, so I just want to say that.
Yep, so the 612 is a consistent presentation that's given at the start of school where we help them to understand through assemblies and other formats around what's in here. Other schools are already planning on using their social emotional learning blocks to review expectations, to build community and make sure that they understand the expectations that are in here. So that's part of what happened through our SEL curriculum writing this summer as well.
So I get, just to follow up, will kids also be part of the presenting to the
Oh.
rest? Yes, will they be involved? Will they be involved in the presentations?
Actual rollout. That was not an expectation from the committee. So it would be dependent on the building if they involve students in the rollout.
Any other questions? Ms. Farah?
Just another one, just a quick one, page 26, 27. I know you mentioned that we have dealt with clothing issues in the past, and I know I touched base with this last year. But I gotta say, what is our interpretation of students coming to school in, and I'm gonna say a loose term here, sports bras and bras? Because I definitely did see it. So I would like to see going forward, and I know that we have on here that students must wear, can wear versus what they can't wear, but if we're seeing something like that, it's kind of not appropriate when we're kind of trying to model great behavior. We're trying to develop and shape these students and these scholars for appropriate behavior to be out in the workforce. I gotta say, there's not a lot of jobs out there that I consider less clothing versus more clothing. I would suggest changing the verbiage as far as the midriff's concerns. That's going to take away the fact that we're not going to be able to see students in sports bras or any kind of bra material that lacks the shoulders to the knees, per se.
So that was a big emphasis a few years ago, was looking at that section. That wasn't a section that was reviewed this year. And I haven't heard from any stakeholders that that has been something to revisit. So I think it would just be dependent on the focus of the code of conduct next year if that comes up as something that we want to look at.
Any other questions? Dr. Herwick?
So thinking about Mrs. Farah's comment and being the mom of a teenage girl who I struggle with constantly with covering up, I'd love to hear what parents have to say about those particular issues. I would hate for us to make the decision arbitrarily, but I would like to see maybe the schools put together a focus group with parents to actually discuss those specific sections so we can come together on something that makes sense for all. Because what is proprietary, or in my household, not proprietary, but what I might seem is what may seem proper for me or what is acceptable for my daughter might be something different in someone else's household. So if we, if we are going to pursue some kind of conversation around that section, I'd love to have a focus group or see a focus group with parents and kids involved in having that conversation. Because I also believe that we build kids from the inside out, not from the inside in. However, I do, respect what Mrs. Farah is saying about preparing them for the workforce and the world to come, but I'd love to have more voices weigh in on that so we can come up with something inclusive.
Anybody else? I'm just going to make a quick comment. The document itself is an amazing document. When you really look at it and read it, I think the struggle anytime with the code of conduct is the implementation. I mean, that's, people are different. I mean, Christine, you and I might handle an issue in here totally differently, and that's the thing I think we have to remember sometimes is there's people involved, and people have different ways how they look at an issue or choose to handle an issue, and that's where the struggle's been. So I truly appreciate, in my time, that's always been one of my, I guess, gripes, was the implementation of the code of conduct. And that was really the focus this year, and you guys have tightened that up, so I'm really interested to see a year from now when we're having the same conversation, how the implementation has went, because I think that was one of the failures that we've had as a school district over the years was our implementation, and we focused on that this year. So I want to thank you guys and appreciate that work you've done.
I hope it feels different too.
And just as a note, our next meeting, we'll have a public hearing on the code of conduct, and then the following meeting, we will vote on the code of conduct as a Board of Education. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.
Moving on to 4.02, Superintendent Groutman.
So yes, in the same way that we have a Code of Conduct Committee, we have a Safety Committee, and I would ask Mr. Chatterton to come on up and share with us the changes that we are making to our safety plan.
Good evening. So I'm going to present to you the safety plan tonight and explain how we went about in doing the safety plan. Before I get into my actual presentation, I just want to urge you, like I do every year, and just like I send emails to the state every year when I submit our plan, to somebody, stop the madness in Albany and New York Ed, and make it so we have to stop posting our safety plans on our website, make it so building plans actually go somewhere and mean something, which, you know, they don't right now. So, you know, I urge you when you go to boards, conferences, to address that, because there's no reason we should be posting our safety plan on our website, and there's no reason that the building plan should be submitted and then disappear into cyberspace. So that's my plug on that. Our district-wide safety plan is updated every year. Last year, in 2022, we updated it, we put it in front of your board. I go through our plan. I did make some slight changes to this plan on how we do it, but it's generally, it goes on our district-wide website, like I already said. So for that reason, we keep our plan very bland. There's a checklist that we have to follow to make sure that it meets all New York State requirements in case we're audited. Our plan meets that checklist. I went through all that. Then I've started working on our building level plans. Those are confidential. Those get submitted to New York State and the local police department also. And we'll submit those to the portal in late August, early September, probably more early September, because we have to certify that we did all of our necessary training with our plan. With our plan and our employees. So our district, what did we do this year? We added the TAP app to it because we're going to use our TAP app, which is a platform that we bought, and we rolled out at a couple schools before the end of the year, but we added that to the safety plan because we're going to use it in reunification. We're going to use it for emergencies. We also had to add a new remote instruction plan. Here's another example of the state making us add something because they didn't know where else to put it, and it added 4 pages to our plan. So there's no reason an emergency remote instruction plan should have to go into your safety plan, but it is. It's there. It's there. So we open it to public comment now, and it's open for 30 days, and then we'll ask you to adopt it at the August meeting, the second August meeting, to be approved. But I can assure you that we meet all standards right now, that our plan is probably one of the best in the state. And not only that, we train our staff in it. We make a road show, like Christine Baker calls it, every September, go to every staff meeting, go over it with our staff, go over with our security. So our plan is very, very modern, very updated, and it meets all standards. Questions?
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
So same with the code of conduct. Our next meeting, we'll have a public hearing on the safety plan, and then we will adopt it at the second August meeting. Moving on, item 5.01, quarterly reporting of professional service contracts greater than $50,000 for 22-23. Can I have somebody move that to the table, please? Moved by Mr. Butler, seconded by Ms. Farmer. Comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing none, all is in favor. That passes 8-0. Moving on to 5.02, change orders. Can I have somebody move the change order to the table? Moved by Vice President Malloy, seconded by Ms. Farmer. Any comments, questions, or concerns on that? The only comment I'll make is it's a change order amount of $12,038. With that, all those in favor? That passes 8-0. Moving on to 5.03, non-district transportation request. Can I have somebody move that to the table, please? Moved by Mr. Butler, seconded by Mr. Maloney. Comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay, that passes 8-0. 5.04, the acceptance of district responses to the 22-23 internal audit. Can I have somebody move that to the table, please? Moved by Mr. Maloney, second by Ms. Flores. Comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? That passes 8-0. Moving on to 5.05, the fund balance transfer to the capital fund. Can I have somebody move that to the table, please? Moved by Ms. Flores, second by Mr. Maloney. Comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? That passes 8-0. Moving on to 6.01, Quarterly reporting of service contracts greater than 20,000 but less than 50, that's written information only. Does anybody have any questions? I just have a question on that. The Alive and Well enrichment, can we talk to me about that? If you can't do it now, that's fine. Okay. Okay, thank you. Anybody? Okay. All right, 6.02, the revised property tax collection report can, that's for information only. Anybody have any questions on that? Seeing none, moving on, 6.03, the budget and revenue status report for May. Does anybody have any questions on that? All right, moving along to to the consent agenda. Can I someone move the consent agenda table, please? Moved by Vice President Moore, second by Ms. Flores. Any comments, questions, or concerns on the consent agenda? I'm just going to thank the Extra Classroom Fund at Arcadia for their donation for the Adams family, the Athena Middle School Extra Classroom for the SpongeBob donation, Athena High's Extra Classroom for payroll costs associated with the show choir staff, Donuts West for their donations to the Greece Community Schools and the Greece Food Pantry, district-wide extra curriculum donation from the Linda Ingram Scholarship Fund and $2,000 they raised, and from Suntex International for their donation to Pine Brook of $5,000 for our regional math winners. With that, all those in favor of the consent agenda? That passes 8-0. Moving on to item 8.01, textbook recommendation. Can I someone move that to the table, please? Moved by Ms. Flores, seconded by Ms. Farmer. Comments, questions, concerns? Seeing none, all's in favor? That passes 8-0. 8.02, ELA program textbook recommendation. Can I someone move that to the table, please? Moved by Dr. Trawick, seconded by Ms. Flores. Comments, questions, concerns on that? Seeing none, all's in favor? That passes 8-0. Mr. Maloney.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Very good. Is there a second? Dr. Trawick with the second? Oh, you objected? I'm like, nobody ever objects to that. All those in favor? That passes 8-0. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. See you next month.